the number one thing in these rankings that I was most surprised about is BYU being down at number 9. Yes, they're the number 4 seed, so it may not seem like it matters, but because they're the number 9 seed, if they drop a game, suddenly they could get leapt by a Boise State who's not far behind at number 12.
Chris, I don't think there's a could about it. I think it's a will.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll see, because it could be a one-loss Iowa State, and who knows. But that BYU team is undefeated. It has 2 top 20 wins. It won at SMU, and they blew out Kansas State at home. The 4 teams ahead of them, Indiana, Tennessee, Penn State, and Texas, have 1 top 25 win combined between them. Like, I'm very surprised how low BYU is, and the Big 12, I imagine, is not happy about that.
Guys, let's talk about Indiana, because I thought Indiana would get a little bit more respect from the committee. They are sitting there at number 8, the same place that they are in the media poll. The coaches poll have them at 10. I've been saying this all season, well, since about week 7, week 8, and I am more sure of it now than I have been at any other point. I get the schedule is not that strong. I get that. But if Indiana was wearing Ohio State on their chest and they had been doing to teams what Indiana is doing, they would not be ranked 8th. It's a little ridiculous to me. I get the schedule complaints, but you look at Georgia struggling with Kentucky, and you look at all these teams. Ohio State struggles with a not very good Nebraska team. Like, these things, you got, at some point, you got to respect dominance and being able to just beat the crap out of teams. It's not Indiana's fault that Michigan's not that great, that Washington's not that great. What did they do? They're beating the heck out of teams at this point. And to me, if you look at what Indiana has actually done, schedule aside, if you think that Ohio State or Alabama or any of the other teams that had the exact same schedule and had won by the exact same scores would be sitting there at number 8, you're kidding yourselves. It's frustrating to me. If I was an Indiana fan, I'd be furious.
I think Indiana's fine. Like,
they're fine, but
you can't say
fine, but at the same time, they should still be higher. And I will say, you say they're fine, but if you're sitting there at number 4 or you're in Georgia's spot, Georgia can still lose a dumb game and make the field. Indiana cannot. Indiana can lose to Ohio State and still make the field. Indiana can't drop, whoever they've got. I don't know who they've got left.
Yeah, because Georgia went. You can't say schedule aside because Georgia went and won at Texas. Like, Indiana, they're fine because they still have to play Ohio State. Like, you can't say schedule aside because schedule strength is clearly very important here for what the committee is doing. It always is. I was in the mock committee this year. I went through it. I wrote about it today on The Athletic. And the way they organize the schedules, there's a lot of green if you play good teams and red for bad teams. And it really just kind of visually hits you where strength of schedule has a really big impact. And Indiana doesn't have a win over a team in the top 25. Like, that's it. It's pretty simple. You go to Ohio State and you play a close game, you're good. That's the Penn State situation. Like, Penn State beat Illinois. They've got a couple of like decent wins, Illinois 6-3 and that kind of stuff. Indiana just needs to take care of business, not get destroyed at Ohio State, and you're probably fine.
They should just win.
They should be, honestly, Ubben, I'm on the opposite of you. I feel like Indiana fans should be happy with where they are. And everything that Chris just said plays a factor, but also they haven't been there before. Like, we don't know how this team is going to respond. And whenever it was, who was it? It was Oregon, Illinois. And Illinois just looked like they shouldn't have been in that game at all. Like, they weren't ready for the big moment. Well, although Indiana is being dominant in their wins, like, they haven't proved that they're ready for the moment yet. And I think that that's going to come against Michigan, Ohio State potentially. And then if you put the pause on Purdue, then we can sit there and look at you and be like, okay, you're ready for the moment. But when you combine their record, yes, they're 9-0. They look really good. They have been dominant, but it's just not in the fashion that convinces maybe the committee or fans that, they're ready for the big time matchup. So maybe that plays a part in it. I don't know. But if I was an Indiana fan, I would be happy because you couldn't have predicted this at the beginning of the season. You could not have predicted to be 9-0, undefeated, going into Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue at the end of the season in the play, like right in the middle of the college football playoffs. Like, they got to be happy to be where they are.
I would also say with Indiana, it's not that they're Michigan helmets or whatever. It's that they started unranked and that they started way down.
But that's the whole thing with the committee is that they shouldn't start. The committee doesn't start them anywhere. That's what
I know. But it's impossible to ignore.
If anybody looks me in the eyes and tells me if they're a big brand and they beat the heck out of everybody, Indiana is not getting the benefit of the doubt that a lot of these other big brands get. It's just the reality of the situation. There is no way you can look me in the eye and tell me that if Ohio State had done exactly what Indiana did, that they would not be higher than 8th in the poll. There's no way.
But they've been there. They've done that before, though.
But this is supposed to be just this year. It's supposed to be just what we've seen. And I think this is what I'm saying.
It's supposed to be. I
think you're right. That's my point, though, David. I think that the committee, without intending to, gives these schools, the bigger schools, a little bit of benefit. I think it's about recruiting. It's about the eye test, all these things. I get it, but I think my point is if you actually watch Indiana this year, they should be getting some of those eye test breaks that the bigger schools get because they've just been so good. You watch them, they do everything. It's crazy.
I feel like you said the same thing about Clemson quietly, and then they got routed. It kind of feels the same to me.
But Georgia game was not the preseason, unfortunately. But
to your point, though, I mean, you look at Michigan last year. Michigan didn't play anybody until those final 3 games, and I had them lower in my rankings. And Michigan fans got very upset, and I just kept saying, "Play somebody."
They were 3 in the first committee rankings.
Yeah, but again, they started high because they started where they were, coming off of 2 straight playoff appearances. Like it's impossible to kind of
not supposed to be a factor, Chris. It's not supposed to be a factor.
As long as Indiana either beats Ohio State or doesn't lose by 40 points, they'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
In the rest of the schedule. And it is consistent. It is consistent in some ways because Army being at number 25, they have played nobody. And I don't have Army in my top 25 and people keep getting mad at me about it.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it.
Their schedule is literally the second worst in the country, only ahead of Liberty. So all the hate that Liberty was getting last year and this year, you kind of have to apply the same thing to Army right now. Again, they've got Notre Dame coming up. They've got a 5-3 North Texas team this weekend. The games are coming, but Army hasn't played anybody to this point, and I think that's fine. And that's where Indiana and Army were the only 2 teams who hadn't trailed all season until this week when Indiana went down to Michigan State. So I think that part is being consistent.
We haven't really gotten into SMU. Chris, how should SMU feel right now?
They should feel disrespected. I had them at number 11. They just demolished a Pitt team that the committee put at 18. Their only loss is to BYU, who's number 9. They also went on the road and won at number 22, Louisville. Like I had SMU at 11 ahead of Alabama and ahead of Boise State. I had Alabama out of the field. So SMU is in a position now where they probably need to win out. One loss, even if it's in the conference championship game, because they finished with Cal, Virginia, Boston College. None of those wins are going to really boost them anymore. The chances of the ACC getting 2 basically hinge on if SMU upsets Miami in that championship game. I think SMU, I do think, is a bit disrespected here because they do have the wins. They have 2 top 25 wins, and their only loss is to an undefeated top 10 team. Like, that's good. It took them early in the season to kind of get things going. The Nevada game wasn't great, but they got the quarterback situation figured out, and they've been rolling and playing really well. So I'm surprised they're that low.
Yeah, and I think, too, for whatever it's worth, Chris, they're still undefeated. Clemson's got 1 loss. I'd have to look at the tiebreakers again between 2 teams with 1 loss, but I think they can still get in with 1 loss. So in theory, they could drop a game, and then it comes down to if you upset Miami. I'll be interested to see how the committee treats them if they do win out and lose to Miami. And I think it will matter a lot how that loss looks. Ward Manuel wasn't specifically talking about that specifically, but I think SMU, well, really the Big 12 and the ACC, whether that's Iowa State, we'll see if Iowa State creeps up there. What happens to BYU? I mean, how those losses happen in the Big 12 and ACC championship will determine a lot about how those champions are treated. So maybe we'll see a situation where we get Jim Phillips or Brett Yormark. Is there an NBA jam button, like whenever you're like up 30 points on a guy and then all of a sudden you can't make a shot and everything happens for the guy that's losing is getting. Basically, they're going to pick up the red phone, but this is gonna be a close game. This is gonna be a close game either way. We'll see.
I tell you what, you should get Brett Yormark right now pounding the table for BYU. You should have Jim Phillips out there pounding the table for SMU. You have to push back now. Jim Phillips got a lot of crap from Florida State fans for being nowhere to be seen on selection Saturday, the championship game Saturday last year, while Greg Sankey was making the rounds, saying the possibility that Alabama and Georgia should both get into the 14 playoff next year, which is ridiculous. But he was out there making the case. And so the way the committee works, again, every conference has a couple of point people on the committee. Like a couple committee members, here are your conferences. all the teams in the conference, you direct your lobbying to this person, your stuff to this person, and these couple of people, and they take it to the rest of the committee. So those Big 12 and ACC people really need to really be doing that. Get out there, say you're not happy with your position in the committee, because ACC and Big 12 in a bad spot. BYU should be higher, SMU should be higher, and the commissioners, some of which don't like to ruffle feathers, are going to need to start doing that.
Yeah, that's an important real quick, Damon. That's an important relationship, because that's how you make sure the committee knows, hey, when we played X team, we didn't have our second round pick left tackle. Our quarterback left in the third quarter of that game. It's hard to see everything, and they might know that, but they might not, and you can make sure. Damien, what were you saying?
Well, no, I was just going to say, are we having the exact same conversation about SMU that we were having for Indiana? Because in my mind, if you put an Alabama A or a Georgia G on SMU's jerseys, I think they're ranked higher. I think with their resume, I think with their 2 top 25 wins and their 1 loss to BYU, I think they're ranked higher. I think their resume definitely compares better than some of the teams who made it in above them. So I feel like this is the same exact conversation of, if this was a big time program, if this was an Alabama or an Oregon or somebody like that, they would have much more respect, and they would be a top, like one of the top 12 teams.